Is The Last of Us 2 overrated or underrated? This should be an easy question, right? How many game awards has The Last of Us Part 2 won? This many is the answer. Look at these numbers, look at these stats. This game is a 100% bona fide masterpiece. End of Wait, hang on. What do we have here? Okay. Forget what I was saying before. This game sucks and you shouldn't like it. Or, okay. Let's figure this out. Let's start with a little background. When it comes to 2013's The Last of Us, the consensus is pretty clear. Everybody loves that game, and they should. It's fantastic. So fantastic that it put a hell of a lot of pressure on the sequel. The Last of Us Part 2 was up there with GTA 5 and Skyrim when it came to sequel hype. But while the other two examples seem to more or less satisfy fan hype, The Last of Us Part 2 released to controversy and fan polarization. Many critics and even players have hailed it as a triumph, but seemingly just as many others have claimed it was a complete disaster. No matter what the opinion is, no one seems to be neutral. So, are the haters right? Is this critically acclaimed, award-winning game overrated? Or are the fans right? Is the game that got all the hate the internet is capable of underrated? Now, if we're gonna figure this out, we're gonna have to look at what the critics don't like. Oh, and if you haven't figured it out already... So, let's start with the big one. In the first act of the game, Joel, the primary protagonist of the first game, is killed. And not just killed, he is really bloody killed. This move angered a lot of fans. After all, Joel was a fascinating and beloved character who won the hearts of fans. Seeing him die was difficult for them. Now this may be controversial to say, but I think it was a good move. Look, I love Joel as much as the next fan of The Last of Us, and I was really sad to see him go, and go in such a brutal way. But it is in this emotional response that lies the beauty of it. I and so many others who played this game were genuinely emotionally moved by the death of this fictional character. To me, that just shows how good the character is, and how powerful the plot of this game can be. I know it hurt to see Joel die, but this story was written to get an emotional response from you, and as far as I'm concerned, mission accomplished. Not only is this scene so powerfully memorable, but it perfectly shifts the focus of the story to the game's true protagonist, Ellie. This moment is made so much stronger because, like Ellie, we're forced to watch it, powerless to prevent it. Then when we do start playing, we are perfectly aligned with the motivation and emotion of Ellie. Think about the ways games have tried to put you into the shoes of the main character. For a while, the go-to strategy was the silent protagonist, which developers thought players could project themselves onto. The Last of Us Part 2 made me identify, connect, and become the character of Ellie, who is nothing like me, in such a more meaningful way. I consider this to be a triumph. Now, many complaints about this plot point are that it seems to be out of character for Joel. The same man who was as cold as ice and trusted no one in the last game gets goofed into death by people who should never have had the upper hand. Well, in addressing this criticism, I think Video Game Donkey did it best when he said that it is entirely because of the emotional journey of the first game that Joel turned into the kind of person who would find himself in this situation. This is a Joel who has learned to trust again, and it was that emotional growth that was his downfall. The game isn't saying that his emotional growth was a bad thing though, it's just so much more heartbreaking that his death came because of it. Now the next big complaint is all about Abby. We've already covered the fact that people didn't like that Joel was killed. But what's worse than killing your favorite guy? Around halfway through the game, you stop playing as Ellie and start playing as Joel's murderer, Abby. Now this was a bold choice. The previous 10 hours of game did just a fantastic job of making you really hate this character. You've been fighting tooth and nail to track her down and get revenge. She is by all accounts at this point in the game, the villain. To me, this concept is true genius. One of the most interesting things a story can do is develop the antagonist, making them more interesting, rounded, and potentially sympathetic. The Last of Us 2 takes this several steps further by making you play as Abby for an equal amount of time, as you explore her journey, her past and present. This concept is cool. This concept. Unfortunately for the game, this is where I have to side with the critics. I genuinely appreciate what the writers were trying to do. They wanted to challenge the player's motivations and ideals by making them identify with the villain as much as the hero. But after a number of hours playing as Abby, I still wanted Ellie to kill her. Her backstory, while emotional, just can't have the same weight as Ellie's, who we've gotten to know for so much longer. I'm not a fan of this character, but I have to appreciate just how unique the game is for attempting what they did. And finally, the ending. People hated it, but today I will do the unthinkable and defend it. I think what people disliked most about the ending is that after so many hours of building up to the completion of Ellie's mission, she has Abby right where she wants her, she's ready to finish it all, and then she just doesn't. This was challenging for a lot of players, myself included at first. People say that by not killing Abby, the events of the game were all for nothing, but I disagree. I think that Ellie killing Abby would mean the events of the game were for nothing. You see, Ellie, for much of the game, like the player, is blinded by rage at the murder of Joel, but it's in the moment where she decides to let Abby live that she realizes what her relationship with Joel was all for. The post-apocalyptic setting shows the collapse of order and decency in society. This is reinforced throughout the game as Ellie experiences the brutality of this world. She witnesses and does awful things. She kills, well, I don't have an exact number, but a lot of people. So it could be fair to ask, what's one more? Well, when Ellie sees the child that Abby has been protecting, she is reminded that even in this terrible new world, there still exists some humanity. She sees in this dynamic something familiar. That's what makes all the flashback scenes of Ellie and Joel so meaningful. They're not just there to show that they had such an important relationship, but to show how amazing it is that this relationship could form in a world that is seemingly so broken. Joel didn't think it would be possible until he met Ellie, and I believe that her decision not to kill Abby was her realizing what Joel was trying to show her towards the end of their time together. And that, to me, is so much more satisfying than the fulfillment of her revenge quest. I don't believe that this is an overrated game. I don't believe that the awards it was given were undeserved, and it is my sincere hope that in a few years, after people have had time to cool off, that they give this game another shot, and just maybe, see what I see in it.